Uh, so I'm recording you guys. Yes. So, so once again on this one, I'm asking you guys for the most specific name for each figure. My first example, I'm using marks only. Like arrows mean parallel, slashes mean the same side. So I see that the top and the bottom are parallel, and the sides are not. Or as a matter of fact, if I was to extend them, they're gonna meet somewhere at the bottom. So only the top and bottom are parallel, not the other two. So that's what makes it a trapezoid. If the other sides were parallel, that would make it a parallelogram. And then on top of it, if my sides were equal, if they were equal, that would make it an isosceles trapezoid. But because we're not told they're equal, we're just gonna call it trapezoid. So that's the first one. On the second one, I'm doing numbers. I notice that each side is 11.9, so all the sides are equal, not the angles, just the sides. So that's what we call a rhombus. Any questions on these? No? All right. Don't be afraid. It's just a video. All right. Now looking at this one on the quiz, I'm gonna ask you guys to graph. I'm asking you guys to graph the image, but on my example 3, I'm using words. I'm saying 3 units to the left and 1 unit up. So move each of the corners. I'm looking at my corner C. Let me go 3 to the left, 1 up. That gives me my corner C prime. Let me do the same with my B. That's going to give me my corner B prime. Same thing with D. 3 to the left, 1 up. That gives me a corner D prime. I connect my points, and that's basically it. Now, on my example 3, I'm using words. On my example 4, I'm using the notation. But x minus 3, remember, x tells me right or left. So minus 3, that's basically to the left. And then the y tells me up or down. So that one is down because it's minus. If I wanted to do 3 to the right instead of 3 to the left, I would have said x plus 3 instead of x minus 3. Remember, the x tells me right or left. The y tells me up or down. So looking at this thing says 3 to the left, 2 down. If I move my y prime, it's going to give me that, right? 3 to the left, 2 down, my bad. It's going to give me that. That's my y prime. 3 to the left, 2 down. Do the same to each corner, connect the dots, you're good to go. So the same idea, but one of them I'm using words, the other one I'm using notation. On the quiz, I will ask you to graph. So I'm expecting the picture. On the homework, because we cannot graph, I'll ask you guys for the coordinates of 1 point. So if I'm looking at example 4, and I ask you guys the coordinates of y prime, which we can see what y prime is, the coordinates of that one is -1, 3. So homework-wise, I'll ask you for the coordinates because we cannot graph. On the quiz, I will ask you to graph. So make sure you read the instructions. Rene, you had a question? I answer it? Okay. So any questions on these? Okay. Now, one question that people struggle with, so I'm going to look at one question here, is write a rule. Every time I ask you guys to write a rule, I know we've only dealt with translation, so we're going to write translation. Right, next week, we're going to learn other types. But right now, we're going to write translation. Looking at the x's, 2 becomes 1, 5 becomes 4, 0 becomes -1. It seems like each of my x's, I'm subtracting 1. So I'm going to write x minus 1. Then if you follow the y's, it seems like from -4 becomes -3, all of those, it seems like we're adding 1. So I'm going to write y plus 1. Right, on every x, I'm subtracting 1, if you see them. Every y, I'm adding 1. So that's basically the rule. Every time I say write a rule, you have to start with what transformation is it. We only know translation, so we do have to write the word translation. And then what am I doing? Don't just write -1. I wrote x minus 1. Don't forget the x there. And so on and so forth. Now, as an example, let's say my y values were not to change. Let's say I had that. So on my example, I will just write the y by itself, but still do write the y. Right? If the y's do not, obviously, if it happens on the x's, just write the x, but still do have to write the x and the y. Even if nothing happens, just write the letter by itself. Any questions on these? Yes.
Is there space in translation and the parentheses?
After the, yeah, between translation and parentheses, there's a space, and after the comma. And then after the y value, no space. Now, any other questions on these? No? Now, my last two examples, I'm going to ask you guys to find the coordinates of the vertices of each figure after the given transformation. So on the quiz, I will ask you guys the coordinates of the vertices, which means all the corners. I gave you guys the coordinates. So looking at example 6, every x value, we're going to subtract 3. Every y value, we're going to subtract 4. So if I want to know what the coordinates of v prime, I'm going to get -5, 0. Because on my x value, I subtracted 3, right? -2 minus 3. And on my y value, I did 4 minus 4 because I have to subtract 4. Now, if I want to get my w prime, I'm going to get 0, 1. And if I get my x prime, I'm going to get -1, -3. Once again, on the x value, I subtract 3. On the y value, I subtract 4. Now, my example number 7, I'm not using notation, I'm using words. So if I'm looking, I want to write the notation in my mind. First, I look at right or left. It says nothing about right or left. It just says 2 units down. So I'm going to leave the x value alone because it doesn't say anything about right or left. When it comes to y, it says 2 units down. So I'm thinking subtracting 2 from each y. So if I want to know what j prime is, leave the x alone. Just subtract 2 from y. If I want to know the k prime, leave the x alone. Just subtract 2 from y. Looking at L prime, leave the x alone. Just subtract 2 from y. Because it's 2 units down. I never said anything about left or right. If I said something about left, subtract from x. If I said right, add to x. So on the homework, I'm going to ask you guys for one coordinate only. If I ask you guys number 7, ask you guys for the coordinate of k prime, I'm just expecting the values of k prime. Now on the quiz, I will ask for the vertices, so I'm expecting them all. Any questions?